The world's oceans, once the neutral highways of global commerce, have become the newest battleground in the U.S.-China trade war. Beginning today, October 14, 2025, both countries are slapping steep retaliatory fees on each other's ships, threatening the flow of everything from crude oil to holiday toys and adding fresh turmoil at sea. The dispute started when Washington invoked Section 301, a U.S. trade law tool used to counter what it deems unfair practices. Investigators concluded that Beijing's policies let Chinese firms dominate global shipping, logistics, and shipbuilding at America's expense. In response, the United States now charges vessels that are built, owned, or operated by Chinese entities a port fee that starts at $50 per net ton and is set to climb annually to $140 by 2028. Beijing answered within hours, calling the U.S. move hegemonic and illegitimate under international law. China's Commerce Ministry imposed its own levy, 400 yuan per net ton, about $56, on ships linked to the United States, rising to roughly $157 by 2028. A single large cargo vessel could face fees of $3 million for just one visit. China's rules go further than Washington's. The tariff hits any shipping firm in which U.S. entities hold at least 25% of the equity, voting rights, or board seats. That sweeping definition has already rattled the industry. Some American directors on foreign shipping boards have reportedly resigned to protect their companies from the charge. At the same time, Beijing carved out a strategic loophole. Ships built in China are exempt. Analysts say the carve-out could steer more orders to Chinese shipyards and encourage fleets to assign China-built vessels to Chinese ports. These maritime fees are only the latest volley in an expanding conflict. Beijing recently tightened its export restrictions on rare earth minerals essential to tech and defense manufacturing, while President Donald Trump has threatened a 100% tariff on all Chinese imports. Lines of communication remain open, but the trade battlefield keeps widening. The fight is already ensnaring third parties. In a pointed move, China sanctioned 5 U.S. subsidiaries of Hanwha Ocean, a major South Korean shipbuilder, accusing them of aiding the U.S. investigation. Chinese companies and individuals are now barred from doing business with those units, a warning shot aimed at growing U.S.-South Korea cooperation in shipbuilding. Hanwha Ocean shares tumbled on the news. For carriers, the financial stakes are enormous. Analysts estimate the Chinese shipping giant POSCO could face up to $3.2 billion in U.S. fees by 2026. Some vessels en route to Chinese ports have already turned back, and industry planners are scrambling to redraw routes, matching China-built ships to Chinese docks and non-Chinese vessels to U.S. ones. One research note dubbed the trend a spiral of maritime taxation, arguing that shipping has shifted from a neutral service to an overt tool of statecraft. Beyond balance sheets, the new levies could reshape global trade patterns. Higher shipping costs tend to ripple through supply chains, inflating prices on store shelves and squeezing manufacturers. If the standoff drags on, expect longer delivery times, higher freight rates, and fresh pressure on companies to diversify supply lines away from the United States and China alike. For now, both capitals insist they prefer dialogue, but only on their own terms. Until one side blinks, the sea lanes that knit the world together are set to remain a front line in the superpower showdown, and every container ship approaching a U.S. or Chinese dock will feel the cost.
Welcome to AI TV News. 5 years after the COVID-19 pandemic first disrupted classrooms across the country, a quiet but persistent crisis continues to unfold. While some aspects of school life have returned to normal, new data reveals that in the crucial subject of reading, the nation's students are still stuck in a pandemic slump. The latest findings from 2024 paint a concerning picture. Instead of bouncing back, reading scores for many students have either flatlined at pandemic-era lows or continued to decline. Data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, looking at results from 2024, confirms this stagnation for students in 4th through 8th grade. In fact, slight gains that were made in reading back in 2022 have now been completely erased. This trend is also reflected in what's known as the Nation's Report Card, or the NAEP. The 2024 results showed that average reading scores for both 4th and 8th graders dropped by 2 points from 2022. This continues a downward slide that actually began before the pandemic. To put this in perspective, reading scores for these grades are now at levels not seen since the early 1990s. What makes this situation even more puzzling is that we're seeing a different story with math. While math scores also dropped significantly during the pandemic, they are now showing small but steady signs of recovery. Experts have a few theories why. One is that schools may have focused more intensely on math since it saw the biggest initial drops. Another idea is that math skills can be broken down into specific, teachable units, making it easier to target problem areas. Reading, on the other hand, is a more complex skill that relies on broader knowledge and may require more fundamental changes to teaching methods. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of this story is a widening gap between the highest and lowest performing students. The data shows that students who are already doing well have largely recovered and in some cases have even surpassed their pre-pandemic achievement levels. But for students who are already struggling, the opposite is true. They are falling further and further behind. The biggest declines in reading have been among these lowest performing students.
This divide is especially noticeable in school districts that had longer periods of remote learning, which often serve more low-income students and students of color. Let's look closer at the numbers because they reveal the scale of the challenge. According to the 2024 Nation's Report Card, fewer than 1/3 of students across the country are considered proficient in reading. A record 1/3 of all 8th graders are now scoring below the NAEP basic level. For 4th graders, the situation is even more dire, with 40% scoring below basic, the largest percentage since 2002. A 4th grader at this level may not be able to identify the main idea of a story or understand a character's motivation. While no state saw an increase in reading scores in 2024, there are rare bright spots. Louisiana, for example, has managed to surpass its 2019 4th grade reading scores, a success some attribute to its early adoption of research-backed reading instruction. So, why is this happening? The initial school shutdowns were the largest disruption to American education in modern history, leading to lost instructional time and struggles with student engagement. But the problems didn't end when schools reopened. Chronic absenteeism remains a major issue, with rates still significantly higher than before the pandemic. If students aren't in school, they can't learn. This has been especially damaging for younger students who are at a critical stage for learning foundational reading skills, like how to sound out words. Teachers in 3rd and 4th grade report they are now seeing more students than ever who lack these basic decoding abilities. The implications of this reading slump are profound. Reading isn't just another subject, it's the foundation for all other learning. The average learning loss in English has been estimated at a level that would normally take years of intensive intervention to fix. There is an urgent need for targeted support, especially for younger students and those in high-poverty schools, to prevent these learning gaps from becoming permanent. However, this is happening just as the federal pandemic aid that funded many recovery efforts, like tutoring and summer school, has expired. The road to recovery has been slower and more uneven than anyone hoped. The data is clear. While math is slowly climbing back, reading,
is stuck. Addressing this will require a sustained and focused effort to ensure that a generation of students is not left behind by the long shadow of the pandemic.
In western Alaska, some of the nation's most remote coastal villages are facing what officials call absolute devastation. Over the weekend, the remnants of Typhoon Halong slammed into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, battering scattered settlements with hurricane-force winds topping 100 miles per hour, and a record storm surge that swallowed entire communities under several feet of water. The damage was swift and extreme. In Kipnuk and Quigalingok, the two hardest-hit villages, floodwaters tore houses from their foundations, in some cases while families were still inside. A U.S. Coast Guard officer described residents groping through the darkness, clinging to floating debris as the water rose. Search and rescue teams from the Coast Guard, the Alaska National Guard, and Alaska State Troopers launched an immediate response, deploying boats and helicopters to pull people from rooftops and overturned skiffs. By Monday, they had saved at least 51 people and 2 dogs. The storm turned deadly as well. One woman in Quigalingok was confirmed dead, and crews are still searching for 2 other residents reported missing. More than 1,000 people are now displaced. Local schools have become makeshift shelters, about 680 people in Kipnuk and another 400 in Quigalingok. Video from the region shows houses floated off their pilings, twisted power poles, and in Kotlik, an empty home flipped completely upside down. For many, the danger will linger long after the floods recede. Winter arrives early in western Alaska, and these villages rely on subsistence hunting and fishing to stock freezers with meat and fish that sustain them through the dark months. Salt water ruined many of those stores, turning a natural disaster into a looming food security crisis. At the same time, damaged heating stoves leave families vulnerable to sub-zero temperatures that are only weeks away. Geography compounds every challenge. There are no roads connecting most of these settlements to the outside world. Supplies arrive by boat, barge, or small aircraft. Governor Mike Dunleavy has issued a disaster declaration and promised that help is on the way, with state and federal agencies rushing generators, fuel, and emergency provisions. Still, the logistics of delivering heavy equipment or even plywood to patch walls are daunting. Amid the wreckage, stories of resilience are surfacing. In Napakiak, resident Jamie Jenkins called the storm the worst I've ever seen, yet described how local men jumped into their own boats, going house to ferry neighbors to higher ground. Elsewhere, volunteers are organizing food drives and distributing whatever supplies remain dry. Officials warned the road to recovery will be long. Rebuilding homes, restoring power, and replacing a winter's worth of lost food could take months, time these communities simply don't have before the first hard freeze. For now, residents are focused on immediate survival, pumping out basements, salvaging what possessions they can, and supporting one another as they wait for outside aid to arrive. In a region accustomed to harsh weather, this storm still stands out for its sheer force and for striking just as families were preparing for winter. The coming weeks will test the endurance of western Alaska's villages, and the speed at which aid can reach them will determine whether thousands of people enter the dark season with heat, shelter, and enough food to last until spring.